All right, so part 2 of a series. And what did God really say? And this series is very important. Last week we kind of introduced this idea, and I say it's an idea. I didn't create it, but we've all heard hindsight is 2020. It's really easy to look back on our past and see what we should have done, what we could have done better, what we should have done different, or what we should have never done at all. But nonetheless, the truth is hindsight is 2020, but we don't often look back. Because of our pace of life, maybe because of busyness, maybe because of hurt and pain, we don't want to reminisce or look at it. We just want to forget it and move on. We simply don't look at the past. And with that being said, we're doing a whole series on looking back at an ancient story. Actually, the first human beings that ever existed, actually the creation story. But we're not looking at it for proof of God or creation. We're actually looking at it to find answers and meaning to some of life's most difficult, hardest questions, questions that all humanity ask, that every human being from the very beginning up until today, they still ask and will continue asking. Those questions are like, who is God? Is there a God? Who am I? What is my purpose? Or what is the best way to live? And the truth is that we are accustomed in the life that we live, especially here in America, and receiving copious amounts of information. Information is pouring in, speaking to us, telling us all the time what we should believe and what we shouldn't believe, what is real, what is not, what is true, what is false. It's pouring in. But this morning, and what we said last week, what we need to hold to is that, who is God determines what we believe and what we hold to as true. Like the God of our life, the God in charge of us determines what ultimately is in charge of us. And so we looked at the story of Adam and Eve, and a question was posed to Eve. The question was, did God really say that you couldn't eat from the fruit of the trees? And this little question was part 1 of a threefold process of ultimate destruction. This first question actually introduced a deceptive idea to Eve. This simple conversation produced space in her mind to wonder, what did God really say? Could he be holding out? Is he all truth? Can he be trusted? And in her response, she speaks and says, no, this is what he said. And the serpent continues. Well, could it be that he's not telling you the truth? Could it be that if you ate the fruit that he said don't eat, that you'll actually be like God? This second step in this threefold strategy was a distorted desire. She went from wanting to be like God and following him to being God. You mean I can be God? I can be in charge? I can be in control? I can have authority? I can choose what's right and wrong? I can choose the path in life? And that distorted desire led to the destructive behavior, the third process, and they ate the fruit. This was the process in which the serpent led them astray through a deceptive idea, a distorted desire, and a destructive behavior. And the result, we said last week, was this: the greatest thing the enemy can do in our life, the greatest thing the enemy can do in your life is to get you to question God's authority, specifically his authority on what is true. And we asked the question, we left it, and it was really difficult. Last week, I left this question on the table, and I so badly want to answer it. I want to speak my opinion, but the question was, who is your God? Who is your God? And I want to tell you who it should be, or who I believe it should be, but I'm letting you answer it because the truth is, who you say your God is who you follow. Who your God is what you hold to be true. Who your God is your ultimate authority. And for many of you, you might say, God, if you're raised in a Christian home or you've decided to follow Jesus, you're like, oh, God's my authority. And I just urge you to continue, keep thinking about this. Do your actions prove that? Some of your actions communicate that you are your God because you're in control. You make the choices. You decide what's right or wrong. And it's really important that we know this question because this is our source of truth. John Mark Comer, in a book called Live No Lies, said this. He said, our capacity to hold unreality in our minds is our genius. Our ability to think of things that don't exist, to dream. This is our genius. But it's also our Achilles heel. Because not only can we imagine unreality, but we can also come to believe in it. We can put our faith in ideas that are untrue or worse, that are lies. If you've ever studied the Holocaust, you'll see that you can put your trust in what you believe to be true, but it's actually lies. So the question we left on the table is, who is your God? And the answer to this question impacts everything. It impacts how you live each and every day. And so we're going to move to the second question today. Still some things on the table as we move towards the third week, but week 2, we're going to answer this question. Who am I? Now, again, the struggle for me is I want to tell you all the scripture where God says, this is who you are. This is who he calls you. This is who you belong to. But I'm going to refrain from giving you a shotgun approach of scripture, and I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to go through science and psychology. And I'm going to give you a comparison between science and theology. So theology, the study of God and what he says and who he is and what he's done, and science. But instead of putting them out here and making them verse one another, I'm going to try to put them as they speak with one another. And so just hang out with me for a little bit as I step into uncharted territory for my brain. A lot of reading and studying into this week, and so we'll see what happens. When it comes to science, psychology refers to the development of our brain from birth up until where you are now, until you stop breathing. They say that the brain develops mental maps. Now, mental maps are just webs of ideas that have had influence on you since early life. Like since your eyes opened and you breathed, your mental maps were starting to be developed. And mental maps are developed through experience and personal interpretation. All right, so every one of us has this thing going on in our neuro, like deep within our brain, that we call a mental map, and it's constantly being influenced. It's constantly being developed through our experiences and our personal interpretation. And through this, we develop a worldview. Now, you've probably heard worldview before, but how you see the world, your part in the world, what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, what should be and what shouldn't be. Like this is all part of your worldview, and this is all being developed through a deeper space of your mental map. And now your mental map is influenced directly and indirectly. Okay, so it's influenced directly through like parenting in a classroom where someone has direct influence over you. They show you and teach you in a way. Your parents say, we act this way, we do this, we don't do this, like don't throw your food, like use your spoon and fork and, may I be excused, please, all those things. Those are direct influences. They're lessons and experiences taught to you by someone you trust or care about or placed in your authority. But indirectly, we're influenced through observation, through opinions and feelings. And each of us have opinions and feelings. It's around the age of 2 that kids develop their opinion. I don't want to do that. Or it's mine, not yours. They have no clue how they got it, but it's theirs. Like we have this little human who's developing their own beliefs, their own attitudes, their own thoughts. And this grows with us. And I don't know if you've ever done this before. I know to expect it. But I'll go watch a new Pixar or Disney movie, usually animated, and within the first 5 minutes, I'm weeping. They like kill off a parent or something, like destruction happens. And I'm just depressed through the whole rest of the movie. Through a simple, not real story, very fake characters drawn on pictures. And if I just busted someone's kid's dreams, I'm so sorry. Dinosaurs no longer exist. But there's a story of this dinosaur, and his dad dies like in the first few minutes. If you ever watched Lion King, it's like it just rips your heart out of your chest. Those feelings that you feel, those tears that you should cry if you're human. I'm just kidding, sorry. Those are indirectly affecting you. They're observations that have affected your opinions and your feelings. And if you just notice, I just shared my opinion and my feelings with you. So our mental maps are directly and indirectly impacted. But here's the kicker, okay? And everybody get this. Psychologists across the world agree with this. They agree that the average American, so if you're sitting in the room today, born here, live here, this is your home, regardless. The average American absorbs 10,000 messages every single day. Like, just think about that for a second. The average American, you and I, we input 10,000 different messages a day. As you drive down the road, a speed limit sign, a car manufacturer, a license plate tag, the way that person drove, who was in that car, oncoming traffic, a sign, an exit, a road, a golf course. I'm going down Truman if you're not following me. Billboards, restaurants, places of work and employment, offices, parks, churches. All of these things are communicating. They're speaking to us. We see them and we think. We hear them, we process. I didn't even mention the radio or your cell phone or the people in your car. The average American absorbs 10,000 messages every day. And these messages are going into our mind, deep into our thought process, and they are impacting our mental map, our web of ideas, which shapes our worldview. One psychologist in his study stated these words, said there are 3 distinct dangers in these thousands of messages that we are absorbing. And he's speaking specifically to Americans. 3 distinct dangers that we face every single day in these messages that are just being piled upon us. He said these. The first distinct danger is this: we don't pay attention. We don't pay close enough attention to the messages that are being poured in and shaping our mental map. Like, we don't slow down enough to think about, what am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I thinking? What am I processing? That frustration that I have, that anger that I have, that I'm letting just go and letting just stay and hang out. We don't slow down and stop. We don't process it. We don't pay attention. We just let things happen. And when you think about yourself personally, you're like, man, that's a lot. You're right. I don't pay enough attention sometimes. I don't pay enough attention sometimes to the food that I eat, the choices that I make. Those Lucky Charms just look good. And one bowl wasn't enough. I wanted 3 or 4, the box. Who knows? Like, it feels good, right? Like, we didn't pay enough attention. And then to move beyond myself, I think about my kids. I think about the messages that I'm receiving, and I think about my kids' messages I'm receiving. There's been times when we're sitting in the car, my kids sing a song, and I'm like, where did you hear that song? Or they'll tell me a story about something they've seen. Like, where did you see that? Who taught you that? And I realized, oh my gosh, there's so many influences on my kid that I'm not unaware of. Like, I'm not paying close enough attention. The truth is, for all of us, there's so many messages that we get inundated with that we all fall short of paying close enough attention. The second thing they said this: we don't think critically enough. We don't think about the implications of these messages that are hitting our head, our heart, our mind, and their impact on our mental map and how they're shaping our worldview. We don't think critically enough to stop and say, do I believe that? Do I agree with that? Or am I just falling in line with everybody else? We don't stop and analyze. We just kind of sometimes assume, well, everybody else thinks that, so I should think that too. The third and final thing they said was that we're not intentional enough. We're not being intentional. And what I found so interesting about these 3 things, and especially this one, and especially in a secular mindset, which I usually read really critically because they don't have a Jesus worldview or a Bible worldview. But the person writing this said that this is not just about what's new coming into our mind, but that many of us, we're not being intentional about looking at our original mental map. That what we were developed with as kids, and maybe the toxicity of those things that we were raised with. That some of us were raised with loving parents or a loving family who cared for us and provided, but some of us weren't raised that way. Some of us didn't have experiences where love and affection or compassion were a part of our upbringing. And what we bring into our adulthood is this toxic mental map that shapes our worldview. And he's like, listen, we're not intentional enough to slow down and say, hey, I need to let go of some of those things that I've experienced in my life. These three things at the core of all of us, with all the information that are coming in, we don't slow down long enough to pay attention to think critically or be intentional with all that's pouring in. In fact, this is not new information. In the 17th century, a theologian by the name of Blaise Pascal said these words: people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. That couldn't be more true then than it is now. Many of us, with the thousands of messages that are coming in, we're not stopping to say, is this true or false? We're saying, well, how does that make me feel? That made me feel good about myself. It made me feel right. That justified my behavior. Man, they supported me. I like this. Not right, wrong, true, false, but how we feel. And so with that being the premise of today's topic, we're going to jump back into the story of the garden. We're going to jump back into the story of Adam and Eve. And now where we left off last week was they had just taken a bite of the fruit. And upon taking that bite, everything changed. Adam and Eve ate the fruit. And in Genesis 3:7, it says this: at that moment, their eyes were opened. And they suddenly felt something they'd never experienced before. They felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. At this moment, their mental map changed. Something new stepped in: shame. Up until this moment, that had never been experienced. There was no guilt. There was no shame. But at this decision, this choice, something influenced their thought process. A new thought, a new perspective came in. And what they saw with these new set of eyes was something that changed their mental map forever. They felt shame at how they were seen. And in their presence, they cared deeply about what others thought of them and what they perceived of them. And so it changed their course of action, which was once normal and good, because that's what God created. It is now cover up. Like, don't be seen. Like, fix the problem. Shame and guilt were now present. But it wasn't finished. In verses 8, it says, when the cool evening breezes were blowing, the man and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. So they hid from the Lord God among the trees. Now listen, this is the same God who the day before them walked with them in the cool of the day. This is the same God who just verses before we read this said, I've created you and you are good. And good in the sense of perfect, as it should be. In his presence, there was peace. Somebody used the word tranquility, like perfection. And God said, this is good, it's how it's supposed to be. And God gave them purpose and meaning. He said, multiply. And he said, control, lead, care, take care of the things around you. He gave them value. This is who you are, who you belong to. He gave them purpose and what they're supposed to do. And then he gave them pleasure. This is how it's supposed to be. And now, after a disobedient choice, after a deceptive idea, after a distorted view, lens, and after a destructive choice, they find themselves hiding from the God who created them. The God who gave them purpose and meaning. They found themselves covering up and hiding. And let's just be honest with you. Regardless of your view of Jesus in the Bible, from that story of human existence to today, sin does the same thing. And whatever you want to call sin, whenever you do something you know you shouldn't do, or when you don't do something you know you should have done, your response, your natural inclination is to cover up and hide. Like, don't let anybody know. Keep this from being seen. It's our natural response. Why? Because that's when sin entered the world, and that's what sin does. It causes us to cover up and hide. You see, eating that fruit and gave them a twisted, a distorted mental map. And now they're perceiving God through a broken lens. They're believing that his approach could be different. Out of guilt and shame, they hide, because what if he's angry? What if he approaches us and he's not cool and calm and collective? What if he's mad and he does something crazy? Their whole view is changed. And so they hid. This is what sin does to the human condition. And this is how we respond when we make mistakes. And a lot of times, who am I is viewed through the lens of not who we think we are or who we believe we are. It's through the lens of what have we done, good and bad. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. It wasn't created that way. And so this morning, I'm going to try to give us a moment to reframe our lens, to correct our view. In fact, we're going to move to the New Testament for a few moments. And the author, the writer, Paul, is going to speak in a book called Romans. If you don't have your Bible, write this down. I'd love for you to go home and read. We're going to be in Romans chapter 12. I'd love for you to read this. I'd love for you to spend some time just maybe highlighting or underlining or circling things that you don't understand, or things that make sense, or things that are, I would love to understand this better. What's he talking about? Just kind of put some questions in your Bible. But nonetheless, Paul is going to speak to a people that have twisted mental maps. Their view and their perspective is become distorted, which is impacting their worldview. And so he's going to give them a simple dose of reality, like some correction. And we've all probably experienced a dose of reality or correction. When I was writing this, it took me back to a memory. It was almost 13 years ago, because Eli's 13. I was at a church in Atlanta, new working there, learning my way in ministry and working alongside peers and friends and bosses. And the church was going under some extreme change. They were changing our structure. In fact, they called it I just lost the way they called it. My gosh, it just left my mind. Anyways, they're changing the organizational structure. They're changing, hey, this is going to be our focus. Our mission statement was changing. And in this change, we were losing some people. The boss that I reported to for the first year was moving on, transitioning out, flattened. I got it. It came back to me. We were flattening the organization. What does that mean? It's like the lead CEO was wanting to move closer to the people they were leading, so they were removing some positions in the organizational chart. That's what we were doing, okay? Well, I happened to like my boss, love my boss, was a mentor to me. And I couldn't understand why we would make a choice that would remove him from the organization. And so I got kind of heated. And I began asking questions. What do they think they're doing? This ain't fair. And I was all in defense of my boss. And my boss looked me in the eyes one day and very calmly put me in my place. Said, Chris, the questions you're asking, you haven't earned the right to know the answers to those questions. And it was like, how dare you? But what he taught me in that moment was so true. I needed a dose of reality. I hadn't earned the right to the answer to those questions. I hadn't earned the right to ask those questions. Where I was and what I was doing, I just needed to trust in my leadership. I needed to believe in God, you know all things. And in my insecurities and my anger, I wanted to bow up and act strong. He said, no, you need to know this is your place. This is who you are. This is where you're at. And this is what God's going to do. This was a wake-up call for me. And so Paul's going to do the same thing for a set of new believers. And so in Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 1, it says this. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you. Some versions say, I urge you. Okay, and so plead sometimes doesn't come across as strong, but the deep meaning, the background of this is he's not inviting. He's saying, this is what you need to do. So I plead with you, I urge you to give your bodies to God because of all that he has done for you. He says, let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. He's reminding them of something very important. He says, remember who God is. Some versions say, he says, please urge me. He says, in light of what he's done or in his mercies. They're saying, listen, you need to know that this is who God is and this is what he's done. Don't forget who he is. Place in your mental map that this is who God is and this is what he did. Don't lose sight of this. I urge you. And what his urging is to offer your life to him. They understood sacrifice, the listener. They understood that there was a season where people killed animals for the forgiveness of sin. They knew what that meant. But Paul's saying, listen, no. Because of who God is and what he's done for you, give your life to him. I'm not suggesting, I'm not saying this would be a good idea. I'm telling you, this is what's best for you. To surrender your life to him. Offer yourself to him as an act of worship. Like your life is to be for him and his purpose. This is what Paul is reminding them, urging them. He's like, listen, make sure your mental map is very clear. Here's the words. In view of God's mercy, in light of what he's done for you, give yourself to him because this is who he is. This is what he's done. Paul continues in verse 2. He says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. Some versions say conform. Don't conform to this world. He says, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Hold on to that. Underline it, circle it, highlight it, whatever you need to do. Allow him to change you, transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. He gives us these two words. He says, don't copy or don't conform, but let God transform you. Like these two words are very important. Conform is a passive. Conform is this simple, I'm just going to become like everyone else around me. I'm going to copy them. They're doing it, I'll do it too. It worked for them, it'll work for me. I'm just going to be like everybody else. I'm going to care like everybody else. I'm going to think like everybody else. He says, don't conform to that pattern. Like, don't copy that way. He says, be transformed. And transformed is active. It's this putting in the work. It's this evaluating and looking into who Jesus is and who I am. He says, don't conform, but be transformed. And here's like just something we got to hold on to. Like you're like, I don't know about Jesus. I'm not sure about this, or I've been following Jesus forever. I want you to know this. Like in conform and in transform, the truth is, regardless of which way you go, you're being formed. Like either way, if you're conforming or copying or being transformed, either way, you are being formed. Remember the question, who am I? Every single person is being formed. Now, this is where we step out of my league, so just hang tight. In 1998, there was a massive discovery in the brain. And the word that they chose to give this discovery was neurogenesis. And I wish I could really dive into understanding this completely, but I don't have that degree or that intellect. But I will tell you what I have learned. I'm going to give you like the Reader's Digest version, the Cliff Notes, okay? Neurogenesis is and we're talking like, 98, 25 years ago, all right? Like neurogenesis is this realization that your brain every single day is generating new moldable brain cells. And I'm like, some of you are like, so what? I know. I go, hey, hang with me for a minute. This is kind of cool. You think about it. Every single day, every morning you wake up, your brain has created new moldable brain cells, cells that don't have complete direction yet. And the primary shaper of these brain cells every single day is not the food you eat. It's not the exercise you do or the work that you go to. No, the primary shaper of these brand new cells are your thoughts. So a doctor by the name of Caroline Leaf said these words. She said that our mind was designed to control our body, of which our brain is a part, not the other way around. Matter does not control us. We control matter through our thinking and choosing. Simply stated in the most easiest form I can tell you this morning, the ruler of your mind is the ruler of your life. The ruler of your mind, what you allow to influence you, to speak into you, what you allow to sit in your head and heart, the ruler of your mind is the ruler of your life. Solomon, who lived way long ago before these psychologists and doctors and scientists, he said this in Proverbs 23. As a man thinks, so he is. As a man thinks, so he is. Whatever has control of your mind, whatever has the loudest voice in your life, whatever you let speak into you the most, that's the ruler of your life. Now, listen, there are two opposing forces speaking constantly. Now, I'm going to go from science to spiritual, okay? So swing with me for a minute. There are two opposing forces in your mind. The Bible teaches this, that Satan is the father of lies, that he is the one who is constantly speaking a voice, diminishment, a voice of you are not who you think you are. He is not who he says he is. Like, this is the voice that we see in the garden. Did God really say? Like, could he be telling you something that's not true? He creates question. He creates deceit. He works in an area that's maybe like charming and yet deceptive. And he's the father of lies. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what he's known for. That's what he does. And we see that in the very first story we have in these pages. But Jesus says that he comes and he says that he is the way, the truth, and the life. So one comes as a father of lies to steal, kill, and destroy, but one comes to give us life, says that I am the way and the truth and the life. We have two opposing forces and two opposing thoughts and messages that are constantly being bombarded across our world, okay? And Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 10. He says this, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps you from knowing God. Everything gets in our way from us knowing who God is and the truth of who he is. He says we capture their rebellious what? Thoughts. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. If you're still with me, hear this. What you think about you is fundamentally who you are being formed into. What you think about you, what you say to yourself, what you believe about yourself, what you tell yourself, what you think about you is fundamentally who you're being formed into. And there's a voice in this world, and that voice is asking you very simple questions around who you think you are. And his voice sounds something like this. Did God really say that he loved you? Because I know what you've done. I know all the mistakes you've made. In fact, I've kept account of them. And I'll be honest with you, it's pretty hard to love somebody who's made this kind of mistakes. Would you love a person who made mistakes like that? Would you love a person who'd done all those things? The enemy comes in and asks a very simple question. Introduces a deceptive idea. Could God really love me? Did he really say he loved me? And we begin to question. We provide space for doubt. And the truth is, yes, you are loved. There's no greater love than this, than for a man to lay down his life for his friend. What did Jesus do? He laid down his life for you. He gave up his position and his privilege and his authority on our behalf. That while we were still messed up, regardless of what you believe, we all sin. We all make mistakes. That while we were still sinning and doing what we wanted, he died for us. He paid a price for us. In the whole religion world, there's no other God who made that kind of choice, who ran after his people, who sacrificed himself on their behalf. There's no other story like this. So are you loved? The truth is yes. And he speaks it from page to page to page. But the enemy will cause you to question. The enemy will say, did God really say he forgave you? Because you keep on making mistakes. You keep on doing that. I mean, forgiveness can only be so much, right? Like, you struggle with forgiving this person and that person. Like, how could God forgive you for all that you've done? Are you really forgiven? The truth is that he has forgiven you. He said he cast our mistakes, our faults, our failures as far as the east is from the west. He buries them on the ocean floor and forgets them. Are you forgiven? The truth is yes. But so often we let this voice step in. We look at the world and we're like, yeah, that's not forgivable. The world's not forgiving them. We should not forgive them. And we fall in line. It's so easy just to copy, to conform. He's like, no, like be transformed. I have forgiven you. So what should you do? You should forgive. Yes, you've been forgiven. Did God really say you're free? Because you don't live free. You keep on going back to that same thing. You said you wouldn't, but you did. You said you'd get over it, but you haven't. You said you could do it, but you won't. You said you'd tell somebody, but you're too afraid. You're not really free. You're bound. You're stuck. You'll always be this way. That's the voice of the enemy. And Jesus says, no, I died for you. He who knows the truth, he who knows Jesus, you are free. He set us free. Where the power of sin no longer has control over us. Do we still make mistakes? Yes. But we have the authority and the power within him to refrain, to run from, to flee from that which holds us back or entangles us. Do we fall? Do we falter? Yes. But he's given you the strength to overcome. He has freed you from that. Yes, you are free. You see, the question, who am I, will always be answered by what you allow to shape your mental map. What messages you allow to have the greatest influence in your life. If you're questioning who you are, if you're questioning your value, if you're questioning your love or your level of forgiveness, if you're questioning, can you ever, would you ever, I hope I'm free from it. If you're just questioning, is this all there is to life? I need you to know that you need to change your source of influence. You need to allow, and this is more of like a challenge you, I dare you. Allow the God who said he created all things, even us. Allow the only God in history who gave himself up for you and I. Allow his word, allow his voice to be your greatest influence. Allow his message and his story and his opinion and his belief to determine who you are and your value. But the truth is this, that value is always placed in the eye of the beholder. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but go on Facebook Marketplace and you'll see people who have an attachment issue with their valuables. Those shoes that you wore 10 years ago are not worth $3,000, I don't care. They're worth $3, But they're They're valued based upon who holds them, right? You see, Jesus purchased us when he paid the price of the penalty of our sin. We call this the gospel, the good news. You see, sin has an ultimate punishment, a consequence. It also teaches us that for the wages or the price of sin is death, separation from God. But the good news is, the gift that we have is that Jesus paid that price for us. He did what we could not do. He offered his life as a perfect sacrifice, the ultimate forgiveness of sin, that we might become the righteousness of God, that we might have a right standing with him. Not that we will be him, that was the issue in the beginning, but we can be like him, we can follow him, we can love him, we can experience him, all through what Jesus did for us. We have access to this life-changing truth. And the question I'll leave you with this morning is, will you let that story influence you? If Jesus died for us, if he paid the price for us, then he owns us. And as an owner, he determines our value. And he says that we're priceless. He says that we are wonderfully and fearfully made, that we are loved and known and cared for, that we are adopted into his family, and we have access to all that he is and all that he is doing. But this is the good news. And the choice is yours. Who will you allow to tell you who you are? The choice is yours. God, thanks so much for this morning. Thank you for the truth of your word. Thank you that we don't have to look to anyone to know who we are. That for those of us who have surrendered our life to you, Jesus, we decide to follow you. That your words are the most powerful. That your words are what are true. That you know us. Even before we think thoughts, you know them. Even before we speak words, you know them. God, you know us like no other. And you say, I love you. You're my son, you're my daughter. God, may you be the greatest influence in our life. That we would look to you. That we would run to you. That we would seek you to know who we are and what you want with our life. May we heed Paul's advice to offer our life to you as a living sacrifice, because this is what brings you glory and honor, it's what pleases you. And in that we find out just who we are. Loved children of a king, of a creator, of a God who did everything for us. We love you and we praise you. In our prayer. Amen. Thanks for being here today. Love you guys. You're dismissed.